Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Lee Fagan, Deputy Director of Programming here at the Reba and David Logan Center for the Arts. And just want to welcome you to the second Logan Center Blues Fest. We're thrilled to have all of you here. This weekend is jam-packed with events that really feature blues musicians and also those impacted by the blues. So we have authors, and we have filmmakers, and we have poets, and we have actors and directors, and obviously concerts as well. And we, after this, simultaneously, we have some youth workshops happening during this event, and then Fernando Jones and the Blues Kids will be playing at 4 o'clock. So we hope that you kind of come down and join us after you buy a book and get it signed by them. And this evening, we have Ruthie Foster headlining, and Deetra Farr and Leanne Fain on stage with her as well. It's going to be a memorable evening. It's handpicked musicians, and Blues Fest director Matthew Scholar, my partner in crime, has done some amazing work this weekend picking these events. And then tomorrow, I also do want to highlight, for many of you kind of interested in this kind of archival part of blues history, the producer and director of American Epic, the PBS award-winning documentary kind of about kind of the history of American music. They handpicked excerpts from the 6 to 8 hours of the documentary, kind of considering all of the stories that we'd be telling this weekend and the musicians that we'd be highlighting. So if you were here last night to hear Duran play, he's featured in the documentary, as well as Charlie Musselwhite, who will be playing tomorrow night. We still have tickets available for that as well. So we hope that many of you will stick around this afternoon, stick around this evening, and come back tomorrow to see American Epic and kind of continue this journey with us, kind of telling the story of blues music from Chicago and elsewhere, and the impact that it's had on artists everywhere. So without further ado, if that's okay as an introduction, I'd like to turn it over to Bruce and Patrick to talk about their brand new book, and we're thrilled that they're partnering with us to do the first book release event of many. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. It's so nice to see you here. Thank you for braving the blustery day. I hope that you get to all of the sessions and performances this weekend. Just some outstanding musicians performing. Bruce and I are going to try to be as exciting as maybe some of the live performances going on this weekend, so we'll do our best. But thanks again for being here. As mentioned, Bruce and I have just recently published a new book, Bitten by the Blues, the Alligator Record Story. Now, this is our book, but this is Bruce's story, the story of the Alligator label, as told in the book in Bruce's voice. We're very excited about it, and we're really looking forward to kind of sharing with you this afternoon some thoughts about the book. The way this will unfold is I'll ask Bruce some questions kind of based on our work together. And then we really, really welcome thoughts, comments, questions, and so forth from the audience as well, about anything we talk about here or about anything related to the blues in general, because certainly Bruce has a tremendous amount of knowledge along those lines. I want to take a few minutes just to kind of chat with you about how this book came into being. In 2010, I'm a professor at Northern Illinois University, and in 2010, I published a book that I co-authored with Richard Stams, who was a legendary pioneer on WGES radio in the 1950s and 1960s. He was one of a few African-American disc jockeys at that time who were playing the gut bucket blues on the radio. And so we published his story together. It's really a fascinating story. The book is titled Give 'Em Soul Richard, Race, Radio, and Rhythm and Blues in Chicago. And we held a book event at the Center for Black Music Research at Columbia College. And lo and behold, Bruce Iglauer attends the book release event along with his friend Bob Reisman. And if you know, Bob has an outstanding, just a really important book on the blues. I Feel So Good, The Life and Times of Big Bill Brimsey, which was also published University of Chicago Press. Highly recommend this book. I highly recommend this book too, but published by the University of Illinois Press. Anyway, wonderful. Bruce Iglauer, this person who I knew about, but didn't know personally. I was a fan of the Alligator label based on one album that I had. That was the 20th anniversary Alligator collection. Loved it, listened to it quite a bit. And so I had just published the one book and was, unfortunately, Richard Stamps had passed away a few years prior to that being published. Looking for new opportunities, and I thought, well, here's an opportunity. Bruce must have just tons of great stories about the blues world that maybe I could help convince him to put on paper, put in book form. So I approached him about that, and he didn't take much convincing, fortunately. And it's a project. It took us about 8 years to completion. He's busy running a record company, right?
You have a life too.
I have the life too, yeah. I'm busy driving out to DeKalb from Evanston every day, which took up quite a bit of my time. So we began work and got together regularly, and we recorded over 100 hours of audio. Initially, I was worried that Bruce would be reticent to talk about Alligator Records. If you know Bruce, that quickly turned out to be not a problem. And as I say, we had over 100 hours of audio tape that then we had painstakingly transcribed, and then we shaped that into a book-length manuscript. And slowly but surely, with the help of our fine editors at the University of Chicago Press and all their great staff, we managed to get it into what I think is just one of the vital additions to the literature on blues music, and certainly one of the vital additions to the literature on the record business over the last 50 years. Because that's about as long, not quite 50 yet, but that's about as long as Alligator Records has been in business, thanks to the vision and the kind of the hard work that Bruce and his staff and the musicians themselves have put into the label and into the music. So with that, Bruce, I wonder if you want to kind of talk with us. The book opens, part one of the book opens with just a lovely description of the, I guess it was the first time.
The first time.
That you walked into Florence's on the south side. And although it wasn't the first time you had seen Hound Dog Taylor, it was really the first time you fell in love with Hound Dog Taylor and the House Rockers. I wonder if you want to kind of share with us that moment.
I came to Chicago, moved to Chicago to hang out on the blues scene for a year before going to graduate school, where I never actually arrived. And I went to work, got a job working for Bob Kester, my great hero in life, the founder of Delmark Records and the Jazz Record Mart store, which was managed by Jim DeJong, who's sitting right back there, with the glasses and the stylish gray beard. And every night I would go to the south side and the west side to hear blues, because there was no blues on the north side. It was all in the black community. And on a Friday or Saturday night, there might be 40 places to go to hear blues. Now, I missed Barry's presentation, but I understand that you saw some footage of Lefty Diz, and I assume that was probably at the Checkerboard or Peppers. And those were places amongst the 40 places where I would show up to hear almost anybody. I had heard Hound Dog Taylor during one of my pilgrimages coming down here from college in 1969, and he was sitting in. Eddie Shaw, the great blues saxophone player, had a little club on the west side before he had the 1815. He had a little storefront on West Madison, and I went for a Blue Monday jam with John Fishel, who was the guy who started the first Ann Arbor Blues Festival, and at that point was working at Jazz Record Mart. And Hound Dog sat in with the house band, and it was a disaster. Nobody could follow him. Every song collapsed into chaos very quickly. He was telling jokes that I absolutely could not understand because of his very thick Mississippi accent. And I thought he was, and everybody loved him. And I thought, here's this lovable guy that everybody likes, and they let him sit in because, he's part of the neighborhood and part of the scene, but I didn't take him seriously as a musician. Then after I moved here, I was down at Teresa's at 48th in Indiana, and I'll interrupt to say that there's a wonderful book called Down at Teresa's with great photos by Mark Pokentner, who's sitting in the back row there, who virtually lived at Teresa's and took a lot of very incisive, wonderful photos. So I was down at Teresa's one night in January of 1970. I'd only lived here a few weeks, and I ran into Hound Dog Taylor. And he was telling me where he was playing. And he kept telling me about a place called the Crockerdale. And I couldn't figure out what the name was or where it was. It turned out it was a place called the Trocadero. But he also told me about Florence's. And he said, I played Florence's on Sunday afternoon. And he told me it was at 54th Place and Shields. Just the other side of the expressway on kind of a two-block street that was fronted on the other side by some railroad tracks. And there was nobody else playing on Sunday afternoon, so I went down there with some Swedish blues fans who were crashing on the floor of my apartment. And I walked in to what I would say was the closest thing to a Mississippi juke joint that we had in Chicago. The people who were there had come either from church or just from their homes in the neighborhood. Everyone knew everyone. Everybody was having a wildly good time. People were dancing, people were drinking, both outside the club and inside the club. There was a dice game going on right in front using the front of the building as the backboard for the dice. And when I walked into the club, there was this fabulously rhythmic, searing music. And I couldn't see the band because people were standing in the aisle between bar on one side, booths on the other side, typical Chicago neighborhood bar. But I kept hearing this great rhythmic band, and I pushed back through, and there on the floor, no stage, a couple tables pushed aside, was Hound Dog Taylor, played sitting down with a $50 Japanese slide guitar with a slide on the fifth of his 6 fingers. And Brewer Phillips playing Fender Telecaster, standing up with his hair completely disheveled and his shirt tail hanging out, and a terrific shuffle drummer named Ted Harvey. It's the whole band, no bass, 3 pieces. Brewer Phillips played mostly bass parts on his guitar. Hound Dog played lead on slide, but they switched back and forth. And it was absolutely the happiest music I had ever heard in my life. They talk about the blues being sad music. Some musician I met said, no, you listen to the blues to get rid of the blues. And this band absolutely made you get rid of the blues. It was so rhythmic that even I could dance to it. And that's saying something. And I just thought it was the most fabulous thing in the world. It was so raw. Hound Dog had a Sears Roebuck Silvertone amplifier with 4 10-inch speakers, 2 of which were cracked. He was playing at top volume because there was no PA system, so to be heard, they just cranked up as loud as they could go. And so there were sheets of distortion, and of course then you had the metal on metal of the slide. And Hound Dog's very high voice, cutting through, singing with the microphone plugged into the other jack in the same amplifier. With all the joy that cracked speakers give you when you're listening to somebody singing, and I fell in love. I went back to see Bob Kester, my boss at Delmark, and told him about this experience. And he had seen Hound Dog sitting in like I had, and seen disastrous, falling apart music. And I could not drag him down to Florence's Lounge, but I dragged myself down to Florence's Lounge almost every Sunday. And it was a fabulous scene. It was music 3 or 4 hours in a row with people sitting in, just constantly going on. Somebody would go to the bathroom, somebody else would come up. Plus they had a shake dancer. How do I explain a shake dancer? Well, not really a stripper, because she, or maybe he, we were unsure, came out in a minimalist outfit to start with, and then would always grab somebody out of the audience, a guy, and push him down on his back and get on top of him and mime, intimate activities. I'm sorry?
Tassels.
Yes, tassels, yeah. And the scene was just fabulous. There was a guy named Mordez. I don't know what his real name was, African-American guy, and spelled it Mordesz, and he had a huge ledger, and he'd sit at the front table and write down every song that was performed and every change of personnel, except he wasn't writing in English. He was writing in what he claimed was Korean. And nobody else could read this thing. He was there every Sunday, from beginning to end. And there were other characters who sat in. Lefty Diz was there a lot, if you saw the video of him. Magic Slim, who at that point wasn't very good, was there all the time. And the same people, the guys in blue leisure suits or work clothes, and the women, often in their church dresses. And Mr. Hill, who had been a Buffalo soldier fighting Geronimo in Arizona. He was 100 years, we celebrated his 100th birthday, and he was dancing on his knees on the floor, doing back bends. And he lived upstairs. Florence took care of him. It was so wonderful. It was, everybody was sharing the music. It wasn't, we're on the stage and you're the audience. Everybody knew everyone, but also a lot of them had grown up together down south. So all of these songs, all the old songs resonated with them. They would hear a song from 30 years ago and they'd remember where they heard it. And they'd remember the circumstances of their lives. So it was a bonding of a community. Obviously I wasn't part of that community, but I could feel that going on around me.
So, from what Bruce just said, you get a real sense of just how delightful a storyteller he is, actually. And so the book was really, really fun to do, because these stories just roll out of Bruce.
I've been extraordinarily lucky.
Well, Bruce, it's one thing to have an appreciation for a band, a musician. It's another thing to say, hey, I think I'll start a record company to record my favorite musician and so forth. And you were 23, 24 at the time?
I was 23.
23 when you decided, well, if Bob's not going to record Hound Dog, I'll record Hound Dog and I'll start my own record label in order to make that happen. Can you share with us a little bit your thinking on that and that sort of leap of faith that you were willing to take at such a young age?
Well, I knew this band had to be recorded, and I kept trying to convince Bob, and I couldn't convince him. Now, if I had convinced Bob to record Hound Dog Taylor, I'd probably still be working for him, because I was so enthralled with his personality and his charisma. But I knew this band had to be recorded, and I kind of wanted to prove to my father figure that he should have done it. So I decided, I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to make this record. I'm going to capture as much as I can those afternoons at Florence's Lounge. And I'm going to show Bob and the world that they should hear this band. So I had inherited a little bit of money. I had $2,500 that I had inherited from my grandfather, and that was my whole stake. I had nothing else to fall back on. So I approached Hound Dog. At that time, Johnny Pepper, besides having his club on 43rd and Vincennes, had what he called Pepper's Blues in the Loop, which wasn't in the Loop. It was on South Michigan Avenue around 1300, 1400? 1200. It had been Ahmad Jamal's Club Alhambra, and it was decorated in the sort of neo-mosque, is a filigree. It was a very odd place to hear blues. And Hound Dog was there, and we spoke outside, and I said, I'd like to make an album with you. Now, Hound Dog had cut 2 45s years before that were on jukeboxes, a few jukeboxes around the South Side. And he knew me because I had been in his audience 100 times. And of course, he had no other opportunities. Nobody else was coming to him about recording. Hound Dog Taylor and the House Rockers were the cheapest band on the South Side. On a weeknight, $10 a man, $30 for the whole band. Jacked up on the weekends to $15 a man, $45 for the whole band. And those prices were negotiable. So I said, I'd like to make an LP, and without even asking me, what are you going to pay me? What's the business? He said, I'm with you, baby, I'm with you. And we shook hands on it and began planning together. Now, there was a fabulous blues fan named Wesley Race, the Wichita, Kansas hillbilly called himself, and he had come here for the blues like I did, except, Wes was, I don't know if he finished high school, and he was working in a meatpacking place, working labor, and he was just the most enthusiastic possible blues fan, and he was such a blue-collar guy that, there were people who had been to college who had studied blues and, had some concept of ethnomusicology. But Wes was just a working class guy. He was there to get drunk and dance and hang out. So everybody loved Wes, and Hound Dog loved Wes. And Wes wanted to be a part of this project. And I thought it was great because he made Hound Dog at ease. And Wes was going to invest in the company at the last minute. His $1,000 that he needed for a family emergency. But Wes was there, and my right arm and my co-producer, we made a list of every song we had ever heard Hound Dog play, and then made a priorities list. We knew that they could not there was no fixing the performance later. It was going to be totally live in the studio, just like they played. And I couldn't afford to do, 4 or 8 track recording, so we were going to mix it as we went. Just whatever they played, we're mixing on the spot, and that's the record. And we went into the studio for 2 nights and recorded about 25 songs with a couple of takes of each, and sometimes just 1 take of each. With Hound Dog with his Sears Roebuck amplifier, Ted with his Slingerland drums, and Brewer Phillips with his Fender Telecaster playing bass. We set them up in a row, just like they would be at Florence's. I had the brilliant idea that I'd been to a lot of Delmark sessions. I went to every Delmark session I could. And I knew musicians normally heard each other through headphones. Well, I thought, this is going to be really strange for these guys because they've never done this. So I asked the engineer, Stu Black, who had worked at Chess Records, to set up monitor speakers just so they could hear themselves back, hear the singing. And this made them much more comfortable. It also meant that Brewer Phillips, who liked to dance while he played, could move around. He wasn't strapped to a wire. And Hound Dog used to sing, he just had a straight mic stand, and his amp would be right over here. His vocal mic was right there, and you can actually hear on the record when he moves his head toward the vocal mic, the sound of the guitar changes because the guitar was being picked up by the vocal mic and every other mic. There was no going back on this stuff. And we recorded Rough and Ready like that, and Hound Dog actually whipped out 3 songs we had never heard before. And one of them turned out to be the first song in the entire album, a song called She's Gone, a really raw boogie, medium tempo boogie with kind of a John Lee Hooker feel that it was 1 take. And a lot of it was Hound Dog. I remember Hound Dog saying, okay, let's do this one. And he'd just launch into the song, and the other guys would figure out what he was playing. So we made the record like that. A fabulous photographer named Peter Amft did the cover shot of Hound Dog for me for free and designed the cover. I wanted it to look very classic. And he did a sepia tone cover, and I could pay to manufacture 1,000 copies of this record, and then my money was used up. The studio cost me $900. I had given about $800 to the band, about $400 to Hound Dog, $200 to each of the other guys as an advance, and I had pressed 1,000 records, and my money was gone.
How many have you sold over the years?
In this country alone, about 100,000, which is not bad for 8 hours. I built everything 1 record at a time. I had to sell enough of Hound Dogs to pay for Big Walter Horton's first record. I had to sell enough of that to pay for Sun Seal's debut record. And by then I realized that, I had thought when I started the label, I was only going to record one record by each artist because there were so many to hear and so many who deserved to be recorded. But I realized after 3 records, I'd better do another Hound Dog record because that was the only thing that I was making a profit on. And so I ended up doing, there were 4 records of Hound Dog, 2 studio records, a live record that we were planning when he died in 1975, and a record of studio and live outtakes that I released many years later.
So since around 1975, actually, Albert Collins, and I'm wearing an Albert Collins t-shirt, was your first artist who was not part of the Chicago blues scene. Is that correct?
Yes, Albert, I was a huge Albert Collins fan. He had 45s out in the 60s with those cool sound titles like Frosty and Snow Cone and Don't Lose Your Cool, almost all instrumentals. And I had bought, for $1.77 in the used bin at the Jazz Record Mart, I had bought the Cool Sounds of Albert Collins LP with a big Tom Collins glass on the front and no picture of Albert. That had been reissued on an important label called Blue Thumb Records in the late 60s. And so I had heard of Albert. Then he was brought by the rock band Canned Heat, or the blues rock band, to California and played at the Fillmore, and he was signed by a big label, Imperial Records, who made 3 not very good records with him that didn't capture his essence. But in 1975, when he was on his way to the last Ann Arbor Blues Festival, I rustled a gig for him in Champaign, and I drove down to Champaign to see him for the first time, and it was thrilling. He was the most physical guitar player I ever seen, and the loudest. He had a Fender Quad Reverb amp with 4 12-inch speakers, 300 watts. That thing could deafen you. And he played it at deafening volume. He dug into that guitar. He played with his thumb and first finger in this weird tuning. He played in an open F minor. Only guitar player I know who ever tuned that way. And he used a capo to change keys. And it was fabulous music. I never thought my company would be big enough to sign somebody who was known like Albert Collins was, who actually had a reputation. But in 1978, he was again coming through town, and my friend and future co-producer, Dick Sherman, a man who was absolutely essential to the growth of Alligator, was a friend of Albert's, and we arranged 2 gigs for Albert in Chicago with local bands, one with Lonnie Brooks and one with Jimmy Johnson. And we began talking about making a record. And Albert was totally into it. He didn't even have a band at that point. He had no deal, he had no band, he had no agent, he had no manager. And I ended up becoming his manager and his agent and his label. And again, it was live in the studio. I admit I cheated. I recorded multi-track. I didn't record direct to 2-track. And we recorded him with some local musicians: Casey Jones on drums, Aaron Burton on bass, Larry Burton, Aaron's brother, on rhythm guitar, Alan Batts on keyboards, and A.C. Reed on saxophone. And we made the whole record. Actually, we took, by then, I was still making all my records in 2 nights in the studio, but Albert took a little longer. We had an extra afternoon, so it was 2.5 sessions. And that was a record called Ice Pickin', and that was the first of Albert's 6 records for Alligator, one of which was Showdown, the one with Robert Cray and Johnny Copeland, his dear friends, which won the Grammy for the Blues Record of the Year, and is still one of the great prides and showpieces of Alligator, and it just holds up really well. And it was all their fault because they loved each other so much they made a great record together.
I think it's important for us to, when we talk about the history of Alligator, to talk about the many women musicians that you've recorded over the years, starting with the Queen of the Blues, Coco Taylor, but also Katie Webster, Marcia Ball, many others. I wonder if you take a minute to just kind of speak to the importance of those artists to the label.
Well, Coco Taylor obviously, was the first first female artist who came to Alligator. I was afraid to record Coco. I had never recorded a stand-up singer. I had always recorded singer-players. And for a guy who's produced or co-produced about 130 albums, I cannot play an instrument, and I only vaguely can sing in tune. And I can't read music. So everything that I know about music, I learned from hanging around with musicians. And I learned to speak blues and to be able to talk about different beats and different chord changes, but in blues musician language. Luckily, I think there have been about 3 musicians ever at Alligator recording sessions who could read music. So they were kind of in the same boat I was. They were self-taught, I was self-taught. So I was afraid to record a stand-up vocalist because it would mean working up arrangements of songs, and I didn't know if I could communicate that well with the musicians. But Coco came after me. I met Coco at the Wise Fools Pub, which was the first blues club in the 70s, the Northside Blues Club of the 70s, at 2270 North Lincoln. And they had blues there 4 nights a week, and Coco would come and sit in with her friend Mighty Joe Young, an excellent guitar player and great guy from the West Side. And when Coco first approached me, I think I had 1 record out. But there were so few record people. Chess had been sold by then. Leonard Chess was dead. Bob was making a few records a year. Nobody was doing blues 45s anymore to speak of. So there were hardly any recording opportunities. That's one of the reasons that I saw a role for myself and for Alligator, because there were all these wonderful musicians. I could go out on the West Side and see Lonnie Brooks. I could go to the South Side and see Jimmy Johnson. I could see Pine Top Perkins. I could see Luther Guitar Jr. Johnson. I could see Andrew Brown and Carrie Bell, who I would see on the West Side all the time. And nobody was recording them. So, it had to be done. There was a mission. So with Coco, she approached me and she would not give up. I said, thank you, I've got enough musicians. And she didn't have a band at that time. She was just sitting in. She was back to what she had done. She had a hit on Chess, Wine Day Doodle in '66. But Coco was back to cleaning houses. Coco was working up in Glencoe and Winnetka, and she said, I spent 100 hours on the floor and on my knees, and I wasn't praying, I was washing the rich folks' floors.
What year was that?
I met Coco probably in '72, and it took her about 2 years to convince me to record her. Now, Coco was not a star at all at that point. She was not the queen of the blues. She was just a singer who sat in. The black people around Chicago knew her because Wang Dang Doodle was maybe the last blues record that got national airplay on black radio stations, and that was in '66, because blues was becoming unfashionable. Blues was old folks' music. Blues was, God, I hate to repeat this because it infuriated me so much, but I heard younger African American people refer to blues as Uncle Tom music and slavery time music. And, that just broke my heart, of course. And, but somebody like Coco knew that was being said. She didn't have to hear it from me. She heard it from other people. So I decided to record Coco, and we got together with Mighty Joe Young, her friend, and Joe was instrumental in helping with the arrangements. And we recorded an album in 2 nights, of course, 2 nights, live vocals all the way, no overdubbing, called I Got What It Takes, which was kind of a flop. And then some years passed as I struggled to keep Alligator alive, going from one record to the next. And we did one more record with Coco called The Earthshaker, and that one took off. And it was with a great band, with Sandy Lawhorn, the wonderful guitar player from Teresa's, who also recorded with Junior Wells, with Ab Locke on tenor saxophone. Johnny B. Moore was the other guitar player. Cornelius Boyson Newell on bass, and Vince Chappelle, Coco's favorite drummer, a man with a beautiful toupee that you could hardly tell was a toupee, and he was the man who would always introduce her as the Queen of the Blues, the Queen of the Blues, Coco Taylor, Coco Taylor, Coco Taylor. And he kept repeating the Queen of the Blues so many times that eventually we called an album the Queen of the Blues. And eventually everybody decided to call Coco the Queen of the Blues. And then now nobody else can have that crown. That's hers. Once I discovered that I could actually record a stand-up singer and do a good job with it, then I began thinking about other ones, but also, I was raised by women. My dad died when I was a kid. I was raised by my mom, who was a smart, very independent woman, and my grandmother was a very smart, independent woman, and my strange but very smart sister, who went to the University of Chicago. And so I never had this problem of thinking of women as second-class citizens that a lot of those of us of my gender have had for a lot of millennia. So recording women and dealing with women as band leaders like Katie Webster, who was a fabulous blues and boogie piano player, and Sapphire, the uppity blues women who were damned uppity at all times, this was easy for me. I liked working in the studio with women. And I think, whenever I record somebody, I'll say something to them like, I don't want to make a record with you unless you want to make the record that you will want to play for your grandchildren and say, this is my best music. This is me. I don't want to make a record because we're going to try to make a good record. I don't want to make another record that is maybe no better than what you've done before. If you're coming to Alligator, you're coming to do your best work, and I will keep it available. I will, in the old days of vinyl, even if they got slow, we'd repress, same thing with CDs. Your music will be out there, Hound Dog Taylor, I think, would be very surprised that almost 50 years later, people are still enjoying his music. I'm hoping in 500 years, people will be enjoying his music. And that's very important to me. I'm the bridge. Here's the artist on one side, here's the potential audience on the other side, and I'm the person who tries to bring those things together, both recording and in their careers. And at Alligator, we think about careers. We don't think about records. We think about, we're going to help move you to a different level as a performing artist and keep you at that level and keep supporting you as long as you want to stay with us. I refer to the company as a family. And I really feel that way. Everybody's got my home, my personal numbers. Everybody knows where I live. Everybody calls me at 2:00 in the morning. and that's the company I wanted it to be. But I didn't really answer you much about women.
No, you totally did. There's so much more we could talk about. Actually, the book, contains a train wreck.
A literal train wreck, not a recording studio.
Yeah, right. Train wreck's both metaphorical, but a literal train wreck. There are some great stories about in the 80s, recording Roy Buchanan, Bruce's fight with Johnny Winter. That's a good story. You'll have to, we don't have time to tell it now.
Bruce's most embarrassing moments.
Yeah. Bruce turning down Stevie Ray Vaughan, right? Another.
He just sounded like the loudest Albert King imitator I ever heard.
And of course, the book also really does a really nice job of sort of addressing the collapse of the record industry, the distribution, record distribution networks and so forth that occurred through, the 90s and through the 2000s as well with the digital revolution.
The publishers, University of Chicago Press, encouraged me to talk about building the business. I probably would have just told stories about musicians. And Patrick, as an interviewer, directed me that way too. When we talked about his recording 100 hours and me talking, he guided me and was the potential reader, so that he was asking the questions that he was hoping that you folks would be interested in hearing the answers to.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's really a remarkable story. Even how much the record industry has changed over the last 5 years. Even over the last year, right? They've got the new law in place now.
Oh yeah, the Music Modernization Act, which we're still seeing it's very early for me to tell how this is going to work, but it's going to benefit songwriters and song publishers more than record labels. But hopefully it's going to mean more money in creative people's pockets. Because the digital revolution has meant that people think music ought to be free. And unfortunately, musicians can't eat that,
When is the law?
I can't, it's going to be too long to go into. But one of the things it does is it means that Sirius XM and other digital broadcasters now have to pay for pre-1972 recordings, which they didn't before. So everybody recorded in the 40s, 50s, and 60s got nothing out of that airplay. Now, this is the only country, one of the 3 countries in the world where when a music is played on the radio, the artist does not benefit, the record label does not benefit. The other 2 countries are North Korea and Iran. And everywhere else, the creative people and those of us who finance the creative people get something out of radio play. But on the digital side, on the Sirius XM side, on any music you hear on your computer instead of on your car radio, assuming you don't have digital on your car radio, the digital services pay. And they pay through something called Sound Exchange, and it's very significant amounts of money for artists. These checks come 4 times a year, and artists call me up and say, "Oh, thank you for telling me about Sound Exchange because I just got $2,000." And I can pay my rent for a couple of months. So the digital revolution has been good in that regard. That's a different law. That's the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which has been around for a while. Yes.
Could you talk about how you promoted the first album? You mentioned that after you pressed it, you would run out of money. And I'm just wondering how, as a fledgling...
Well, thank you for asking. Between 1969 and about 1974 was the best time for radio in the history of the United States because people discovered the FM dial, and there was a type of radio called freeform progressive rock radio. And for those of you who are old enough to remember WGLD and the early years of WXRT, the DJs were programming their own shows. There were no playlists. They just played what they felt. And they would often mix up commercial rock with jazz, with blues, with folk music, even occasionally classical music. Just to give you an example, Elvin Jones came into the Jazz Record Mart sometime when I was working behind the counter in 1970 or 71, and he had arrived a day early to play at the Jazz Showcase for Joe Siegel. And I said, "Would you be interested in going on the radio?" And he said, "Sure." So I called up John Ryan, who was the midnight DJ at WGLD in Oak Park, which was Chicago's first progressive rock station. I said, "Would you like to have Elvin Jones on?" He said, "Sure." I drove Elvin out there at midnight, and he was on the radio for 2 hours being DJ. John didn't have to clear it with anybody, didn't have to decide what music should be played. Elvin picked the music, he played it. So there were stations like this all over the country because they were all being sponsored, they were all local people, they were all basically 60s hippies like me who were programming the stations, or programming the shows, I should say. And I got a list of these stations, and I left 100 records at my Chicago distributor, and I drove with 900 records in the back of my car from city to city, calling on these radio stations, giving personal copies to every DJ because they were all programming their own shows. I'd often stay at a station for 24 hours, and then I'd go to the distributor that I had in mind, because I had a list of target distributors, and I'd say, "I've got 3 stations in your market playing this record. Would you like to distribute it here?" And of course, they all said yes. So by the time I got to Cleveland, I realized I was going to need more records, and I talked my Cleveland distributor into giving me some money up front. And so I sent it to the pressing plant and ordered another 1,000 copies. I spent 3 weeks on the road doing this, driving from station to station and distributor to distributor. And at the end, I had pretty much national distribution. And I was getting played on stations. I remember somebody saying, "You've walked in here with a blues record. We don't even get B.B. King records sent here by the record labels. Nobody's ever sent us a blues record." And they were happy to play it. And Hound Dog, because he could boogie, because it was very up-tempo, happy music, it felt right for stations that maybe wouldn't have played something, slow or sad, because that's part of blues. So they treated it like rock and roll. And, Hound Dog, as far as Hound Dog was concerned, the slow ones were blues and the fast ones were rock and roll. And that was the distinction, the tempo. Everything else, he didn't think of a shuffle as blues, he thought of a shuffle as rock and roll. Rock and roll was to get people to dance fast. That was its goal. So they treated it as rock and roll. I did this with my first 5 or 6 albums. One time I drove all the way to the West Coast. I drove through the rural South, calling on stations, getting to know people. By 1975, this kind of radio was beginning to die because they realized that they could get advertisers who would pay real money. Instead of the waterbed store and the head shop, they wanted car dealers, and they wanted car manufacturers, and they wanted refrigerators, and it became a business. And as quickly as it became a business, playlists appeared, and music directors and program directors appeared. And what happened was that all of this marginal music, all the niche music, went out the window, and it became this playlist tightened up, and they also whitened up, and you heard less and less black artists on these stations. And if you did hear black artists, it was likely Jimi Hendrix or a Motown oldie. But as contemporary blues began being shoved away or onto a niche show like Tom Marker's show on WXRT, XRT used to play a lot of blues in their rotation. Now they play almost none. So they've got 1 hour a week they devote to blues because they're owned by CBS. And they're downtown now instead of in their weird little concrete block bunker on the northwest side. So they have a high overhead, so radio changed. But I started Alligator at the best moment of radio ever in the United States. And if I had waited 2 or 3 years, I would have failed. It was that moment and being there, right place, right time, that made it work. And probably if I had started with Big Walter Horton, a more traditional blues artist than Hound Dog, I would have failed because they wouldn't have heard it like rock and roll.
Remarkably, I think we're almost out of time, and it feels like we're actually just kind of getting started. So, all of this stuff is in the book. I mean,
He keeps telling me to remind you. It's in the
it
book.
reminds
It's in the
you,
book.
yeah, just read the book. Truly, though, I hope you've got a sense that the book is really just a rich tapestry of many, many stories, not just one story. It's, of course, the story of Alligator Records, but it's a story of the musicians, it's a story of the clubs, it's the story of the many personalities who have been a part of the blues scene, the R&B scene for many, many years. It's a business story. It's a story also about Chicago. It's just remarkable, Bruce, how vast your experience has been.
I've been in the presence of giants, and sometimes I've been able to help giants to be able to express themselves and make their statements that have lasted beyond their own lives. And a lot of these people have been my friends, and I've spent personal time with them away, not talking about music, but talking about other aspects of life. I've helped people when they've been in trouble. I spent my 60th birthday at Cook County Jail. Not in Cook County Jail. I have in fact, and that's not in the book, I have in fact been in jail. I spent a night in 51st and Wentworth, where I stood out in the crowd. But I was there because one of my musicians had gotten in trouble doing something relatively innocent, but illegal by mistake. And I was there to bail him out, and it took from 9 o'clock in the morning till 11 o'clock at night to get him out of jail. He was an out-of-town musician, and after I got him out of jail, I took him to my house. I took him for some food, and I took him to my house because I had a guest room, and he needed to sleep. And I wasn't going to take him to a motel. He was an Alligator family member. I had to take him to my home, and that's happened a fair amount over the years. I've worked with people who've been in trouble. It's really, if you're African American in this city, it's really easy to get in trouble. And it's really easy to get in trouble with the police, which I think we've seen a few examples of recently. And some of my artists did get in trouble with the police, and I had to step in. Of course, I also got in trouble with the police, so. I was arrested for what was really being in a racially mixed car. There was other aspects, but that's why we were stopped, because they didn't like seeing white people and black people in a car together.
So yeah, that's inside, because that's not in the book. That story is.
No,
It's not in the book.
that'll be in the sequel.
That's right. So I think 3:45 is our ending time.
Right, it's past that.
Yeah. So Bruce and I both really want to thank all of you for coming. So we're sticking around. We'll be out in the lobby here. So if you have questions or just want to chat with Bruce,
I've been known to be chatty.
he's very chatty. He's out in the hallway. Books are for sale out there as well, and he'd be happy to sign them. Yeah. Bruce, any last words?
Well, the slogan of Alligator is genuine house rock and music. And what I like to think of it as is genuine because it comes from real American roots. It isn't manufactured in somebody's bedroom with a synthesizer. House rockin', it's there to rock you intimately. It doesn't rock your arena, it doesn't rock your stadium, it rocks your house because it's right in your face. And the rockin' part, hopefully, not only does it rock your body, but if it really works, maybe it's going to rock your soul.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you coming. Enjoy the rest of the Blues Fest.